to Tau Beta Sigma's Women in Music Speaker Series. We're going to get started right away. I'd like to welcome Dr. Abby Fisher, NAU Professor of Percussion. And she's going to be doing a short introduction, and then she'll be joined by the NAU Percussion Ensemble for a performance, which is why these instruments are right here. So thank you and enjoy.
Hello everyone, can you hear me through the mic? There we go, okay. My name is Dr. Abby Fisher. I'm the Assistant Professor of Percussion and Director of Percussion Studies here at NAU. And I would like to thank Stephanie Lamadou for inviting me on behalf of Tau Beta Sigma to present for the Women in Music Speaker event today. We're going to start with a performance by the NAU Percussion Ensemble here. For Percussion Ensemble is by German composer Joanna Bayer, who I'm going to be discussing today. This piece includes 9 different playing services, so the instrumentation is open, and it's one of the first pieces for percussion with open instrumentation. It was written in 1936, and all other aspects of the work other than the instrumentation, dynamics, rhythms, articulations, and to an extent tempo are defined. So when you hear this performance, you will hear a variety of tempo changes. Something that's interesting about this piece is initially, for many, many years, it was just thought of as one piece. Just a piece titled for, we didn't know why it was titled for, and it just had this kind of mystery around it. In 2011, in the John Cage Notation Collection in Northwestern University, the other 4 movements of the piece were actually found. So it's a 5-movement work. The whole piece is titled Percussion, very creative. But this piece is actually one of those 5 movements, and that it's kind of the long lost siblings of this 4th movement here. So when you're listening, listen for constant motion in the parts, increasing and decreasing in tempo and dynamic throughout, and the layering of the parts as well. Thank you. Just to announce the players we have today: Katie Youngs, Lisa Shepard, Noah Garza, Bella Turley, Donovan Stevens, Eli Diaz, Brianna Salmons, Lila Grubb, and Sarah Hayes. Thank you all so much. We're going to have a brief instrument move here, so they'll just move on out and then we'll continue. Bayer was born in Leipzig, Germany on July 11th, 1888, and then she made many transatlantic passages between 1911 and 1935. So she first lived in New York, 1911, 1914, and then she moved back to Germany during the World War I time period. We're not sure what she did in New York when she first lived there or when she moved back to Germany, but then in 1923, she graduated from a German music conservatory, and she moved back to New York following that. Then in the years to come, she earned 2 degrees at the Mannes School of Music, and she took additional classes. She was also working as a servant and a governess for a family in Westchester. In 1930, Bayer was naturalized as an American citizen, and so she had a passport, and she was able to travel back to Germany, kind of back and forth more often. In 1931, she composed the earliest known work, and that is a waltz for piano. It's now part of the cluster suite, and I'll talk a little more about that in the coming slides. In 1934 to 1935, Bayer had a scholarship for the New School for Social Research, and she taught some piano around that time. She was also studied composition briefly with Ruth Crawford, Charles Seeger, and Henry Cowell. And Henry Cowell becomes a very important person in her life. Henry Cowell was a leading figure of avant-garde music, one of the most influential and important American composers. So if you haven't heard of him, definitely recommend to look him up. Then 1936 to 1940, Bayer became very involved in Henry Cowell's business affairs, promoting his music, and this was also during the time when he was in prison. I won't go into too much detail on why, but he was basically in for a morals charge that likely would not happen today. 1938 or 41, we're not sure exactly. Bayer was diagnosed with an illness. It's been listed as multiple sclerosis, ALS, and she also wrote in a letter to Cowell that she had cancer, so not totally sure, but on her death certificate it does say ALS. 1944, this is when Bayer was moved to an assisted living facility in the Bronx, and she passed away 6 months later, January 9th, 1944. So the reason why we have a lot of the information that we do is between the years of 1927 and 1944, Bayer was good friends with a woman named Bertha Reynolds, who was a Smith College social worker and pioneering educator. And Bertha kept diaries, very detailed journals and diaries throughout their time. And so we have 17 years of Bayer's life that we can understand from those diaries. Also, Bayer wrote a lot of letters, and especially with Cowell, and so she shares what's going on in her life in those letters as well. An overview of Bayer's music: she was an original composer in the school of the American ultramodernism. She was really involved in music at the time. She had a community, a lot of people around her. She was a pianist, a composer, a copyist, a teacher, and so it is actually quite baffling how thoroughly she disappeared from the historical record for a long period of time. She made major contributions to the percussion ensemble repertoire, and she can now be placed amongst celebrated composers: John Cage, Lou Harrison, Edgar Varese. Since around 1970, there's been more research, more performances of her works. People are more interested in learning more about her, and her manuscripts are now in the New York Public Library. A little overview of her compositional output: 56 known compositions she wrote throughout her lifetime, divided into some categories: piano, percussion, music with text, and mixed instrumental music. Her earliest known work is Waltz for Piano, 1931, and she also wrote 2 clarinet suites around that time, 1932. Her last dated works are a percussion ensemble piece called Horizons, 1942, and then her final piece, Sonatina in C for Piano, 1943. Music of the Spheres is interesting. It has been discussed as the first work of electronic music written by a woman, by Bayer. However, the score is not totally clear. She includes electrical instruments, and so we don't truly know what she meant by that. Here's a program, the second concert that she had music on from 1937. I know it's quite hard to read. Sorry about that. But I'll tell you here, 3 of these pieces say composer at the piano, and so she was playing her works, and when she composed, she thought of herself as who would be the performer. She wasn't expecting other people to be performing these pieces. So then more on her works for piano. As I just mentioned, she's a pianist, piano teacher, and piano is central to all of her musical experiences. Her earliest known work, Waltz, is part of the cluster suite. The reason why it's called the cluster suite is because it makes extensive use of fist, wrist, and forearm clusters, and this was definitely in homage to the main promoter of cluster technique, and that is Henry Cowell. Then in the mid-1930s, she wrote 3 major piano suites. These pieces frequently included difficult polyrhythms. Also, she was thinking in 12-tone construction for some of them. She used slow, quiet, sparse texture with silence, and that became known as Feldman-esque, if you know composer Morton Feldman. So I'll play a little bit of Dissonant Counterpoint number 5. Then in 1936, she composed Movement for 2 Pianos, and this was dedicated to Cowell as well. 1943, we have her last known work, as I mentioned before, Sonatina in C. It's in 4 short movements, and we'll hear a portion of that coming up soon. She's returning to a more tonal idiom than what we just heard in Dissonant Counterpoint. Sonatina raises some questions. So it's dated June 1943, and that's just 6 months before her death. But at that time, she would have been very ill, and so we're not totally sure if that is the correct date. It was also dedicated to one of her students, Roland Littner, and some of the questions: was he still taking piano lessons from her? Was he visiting her? Was he helping her out? Was he titling and dating the work that maybe was actually written years before? So it's a little unclear if this is truly her final work. So we can see the score over here, it's tiny, of Sonatina in C, and then I'll play a little bit of that piece for you. possible to raise the volume a little bit? Is it soft out there to you guys? It's okay? It's okay? Okay, great. Beyer also wrote a piano method book, and this book included doodle-like line drawings of plants, people on a seesaw, stick figures standing on a hill, and something that looked like a sea otter. She also included lyrical poetry for nearly every piece in the piano book, and so you can see two of the drawings here and two of the exercises. So this one here, all of us like to play right hand and left hand, now right again, left and right, fine. So she just made these like kind of like cute little exercises for our students. I do have the full book in PDF form if anyone is interested in checking that out. Moving on to some works for percussion. Between 1933 and 1942, Beyer composed 8 works for percussion ensemble, a total of 19 movements, about 75 minutes worth of music. She has been spoken about as the single most prolific composer of percussion music in the 1930s after composer William Russell. She composed her first work for percussion ensemble, 3-movement, 13-minute-long percussion suite in 1933, and that is scored for Chinese blocks, triangle, tambourine, cymbals, bass drum, xylophone, rattle, castanets, and tam-tam. Then in 1935, this is the piece that we heard earlier, 4, but actually part of a 5-movement work, 12 minutes, titled Percussion. And this, like I mentioned, was considered the first percussion work to leave the instrumentation completely open to the performers. 1939 was a prolific year for Beyer. She wrote Waltz, March for 30 Instruments, and the percussion Opus 14. In March for 30 Instruments, this seems to be an ironic title. The meter is in 4.5 over 4. And we're going to listen to a little bit of that. We actually played this piece and Opus 14 2 years ago for the percussion ensemble concert. When we played it, we counted in 9/8. There's 9/8 notes, 4.5 beats is 9/8 notes. So not sure why she noted it that way, but that's what she did. Percussion Opus 14 is one of only 3 pieces by Beyer that actually carries opus numbers, so it's unclear why the number is 14, but maybe we'll find a bunch of other pieces in the future by her. And then Waltz, as you would expect, is in 3/4, but there's an emphasis of 3 against 4 cross rhythms. Also in 1939, she wrote 3 movements for percussion. Then in 1941, she wrote the piece Strive, a 5-minute work, 15 instruments for 8 players. And then her final percussion piece, Horizons, also no specific instrumentation, so that's open. Each movement had performance instructions as well as some poetry. So we'll check out a little bit of March here. then just go back to the score again, the first page of the score. You can see all of the space, and then it continues to build and layer as the piece goes on. Her relationship with Cowell, it is thought that she took a percussion class at the New School in New York, and then that's kind of where Cowell's influence on Beyer would have started, along with their friendship. They had an 11-year friendship. I put friendship in quotes because a lot of it was mostly one-sided coming from Beyer. So she wrote many letters to Cowell, including professional arrangements that she was helping with in terms of getting his music out there, especially when he was in prison. Sometimes there was more intimate love letters from her. Sometimes she was just discussing mundane, everyday, activities of a piano teacher commuting all throughout New York, Queens, Manhattan, New Jersey. And then finally, at the end of her talking to him about how she was suffering with an illness. Cowell, he was really trying to not provide an emotional commitment, emotional relationship with Beyer, but he clearly recognized her devotion to his work, and he, as a way of publicly thanking Beyer, he dedicated a piece in 1938, Rhythmicana, a 3-movement solo piano piece. In 1940, Beyer wrote Cowell an emotional letter. She was talking about how her friends were expecting that they would get married once he was out of prison, and she also was kind of explaining that she was uncertain about his affection, so she knew that he wasn't totally into her. But he started to kind of grow more indifferent to her and tried to distance himself more from Beyer at that time. In 1941, to continue to kind of separate professional from personal, Cowell proposed an arrangement in which he would pay for Beyer's work that she had done for him in the past, because she actually was doing all that work for free. They were friends up until that point, and so he wanted to eliminate a situation in which he felt that he owed her something. She continues to write to Cowell. She tells him about her declining health, which is how we know a lot about that from the letters. And eventually she does call Cowell out. She felt exploited. She felt like he wasn't advocating for her like he was for other composers at the time. A couple images here. So we have her 1935 U.S. passport application photo. And then on the right side here, we have an ad for her piano studio to get more students in the Sunnyside Muse. She lived in Sunnyside, Queens for most of her time in New York. And then down at the bottom here, this is a part of Bertha Reynolds' journal entries from 1933. The top one here, March 9, 1933, Joanna copying music for composer teacher. And so that's in reference to Cowell. Final years and moving forward, as I mentioned, the diary entries are really important, and also continue to document the painful reality of Beyer's final years. Down here, January 11th, December 12th, 1943, Joanna in bed now, and that was, Bertha had visited Joanna. 1944, January 11th, Joanna died yesterday, had not seen her since December 12th. So a lot of details are provided by Bertha in how, that all ended. So Beyer, she was moved, as I mentioned, to the Bronx, to the House of Holy Comforter, a home for women who were very ill. And before she moved there, she supervised the packing of her life's work, so like all of her manuscripts, and those ended up in the American Music Center in New York for a long time, and then more recently were moved to the New York Public Library. 1961, Paul Price, a very important percussionist, professor, performer, he conducted a performance of Beyer's March for Percussion at Manhattan School of Music, and then around that time is when more and more people started becoming interested in her, began expressing curiosity about this kind of mysterious woman composer. 1988, Beyer finally received a concert solely devoted to her work. That was at Greenwich House Music School in New York. John Rockwell wrote, Beyer was a neglected member of the New York classical music avant-garde in the 1930s, so neglected that she doesn't even appear in the New Grove Dictionary of American Music. And then there was just kind of continuing of repeating and embellishing false information about her. For example, in a encyclopedia on women in music, it claimed that Beyer was an opera composer, an electronic music composer, and a musicologist, which most of those aren't true or we're just not sure about. In 1945, 1994, more recently, composer Larry Polanski established Frog Peak / Joanna Bayer Project, and this enlisted volunteers, composers, editors who edited and then eventually published Bayer's manuscripts, and so now you can purchase her music on Frog Peak Music website. Bayer was a very intriguing composer. She wrote many important works for composition, but the story of her absence from history is one of the most fascinating parts. Now, with much of her music being performed and also being published, Bayer seems to have finally achieved the attention she so desperately but rightfully sought during her lifetime. Thank you.
All right, thanks everyone. Now Abby's been joined on stage by Dr. Emily Hoppy, as well as Shannon Spark. And we are going to get started with a speaking panel. As we are getting going though, I'm going to ask each of you to go down the line, if you don't mind starting, just talk about where you went to undergrad, what made you decide to get into music as your career, and that's how we'll get started.
Okay. I went to undergrad. Is this on? Hello, hello. Is it on? It is. Okay. I went to undergrad at Lawrence University. It's a small conservatory and liberal arts school in Appleton, Wisconsin. And then from there, I did 1 year of a master's program at University of Toronto, but I finished my master's at NYU. And then I went on to my doctorate at Stony Brook on Long Island, and all degrees in percussion performance. What got me into music, I took piano lessons from age 5 through high school, and so that was a big part of my upbringing. And then I wanted to play flute in 5th grade when we get to choose an instrument, and I couldn't make a sound. But can anyone when I first
Yes.
Okay, so it was just me. And then they're like, oh, you play piano, here's a glockenspiel. And that was like super easy because it's like half of the piano, right? It's just the treble clef of the piano. So I stuck with it. I got a percussion teacher, all that. And then what made me decide to go to college for it was I went to this music program in Wisconsin called Birch Creek. I don't know if anyone's heard of that. But it was like an orchestral program for maybe a week or so. And my mind was kind of blown that you could play music or work on music all day, every day. And I had just done it for that short period of time. And so that was, I think, the summer before senior year. And then I decided to apply for music programs.
Thank you, Abby. And Emily, if you could please
Yep.
share.
Am I on? Am I on?
Yes.
Okay. So I grew up actually on Long Island, about 40 miles east of New York City. So I was pretty fortunate in that I had a lot of music exposure at a very young age. I also started piano at 5. My sister's 2 years older than me, and she is a pianist. So I quit around age 12 because there was no way I was ever going to be as good as her. However, when I started playing the flute, it came naturally to me in the way that I could already read music. I understood rhythm, and getting a sound out was actually quite easy, and can be quite easy if you have the right teacher. I bet you any amount of money I could get you to make a sound on the flute. But besides that, what I really wanted when I was younger was to be famous, honestly. So when I was 8 years old, growing up outside of New York City, I had my parents bring me into New York to audition for the musical Annie. I wanted to be one of the orphans. And I had a very big awareness of, I don't know what it was about me. I wanted to be an actor, I wanted to be on Broadway, I wanted to do all the things. Well, obviously that didn't pan out. I took acting classes and was in musicals and stuff. But I was pretty good at the flute. So when I was auditioning for colleges or thinking about colleges, to be honest, there was nothing else I was really good at. I was really good at the flute. And I really just wanted to play the flute. I had a good awareness of, high-level musicians. I had grown up going to hear the New York Phil, going to Metropolitan Opera. So I was very, very driven to just play and perform and become really good at it. I did my undergraduate at Penn State University. That particular school of music is about the same size as the one at NAU, and the demographic of the students are very similar. All different levels, all different desires, all different career goals. It was a really great experience for me. Then after that, I went to Carnegie Mellon for my master's degree. Fun fact, my first round of graduate schools, I did not get in anywhere. I managed to get into Carnegie Mellon because I called up the teacher, cold called the teacher who was actually at the time the principal flutist of the Philadelphia Orchestra, who was commuting to Pittsburgh, which is the other end of Pennsylvania. Cold called him and said, hey, I'd like to have a lesson with you because I want to study with you. So I took the train to Philadelphia, paid him $250, and had a lesson with him, and he said, you have a lot of potential. I'll call the director of the school of music and let you in. So that was my experience at Carnegie Mellon. Then after that, I was out of school for about 5 years, teaching adjunct at 3 universities, which is when I realized how much I loved teaching and how that was 100% what I wanted to do. And I did my doctorate at Indiana University in Bloomington, Indiana.
Thanks, Emily. And Shannon, if you wouldn't mind, please sharing your experience as well.
Oh, hello. I am on. I can definitely tell that I'm on. I'm Shannon. I grew up mostly in Texas, and I started music in 6th grade, I think. 6th grade Texas band. I wanted to play the trombone, but I was also shut down for my first choice because my arms were too short. So then they also gave me a flute, actually, and they were like, you should play the flute because I could make a sound on it good. And I was like, I don't want to play the flute, so they gave me a French horn. And I played the French horn. I started composing in high school, primarily having been inspired from a lot of the really great video game composers. That's something I'm still really passionate about and like to do, and just for fun and also for the sake of doing it, I guess, which is the same thing as doing it for fun. I did my undergrad at UC Boulder in Colorado. I started as a French horn performance, and I switched halfway through to composition instead. And that was what I had originally applied for, but I didn't get in for composition, but I did get in for horn. So I really worked my tail off for 2 years and then switched routes there. And then when I graduated back in 2016, which feels like forever ago, I applied to all sorts of different schools for my master's. I applied to Michigan, Peabody, Oregon, ASU, places like that. I got in everywhere, actually, which was very surprising, but I had burned out really hard from undergrad, so I didn't end up going to any of those places for my master's. And then I had kind of a pretty tough period in my life after that. Kind of had gone in and out of rehab a couple times. Now I'm coming up on my 5th year of sobriety, which has been really amazing, and I've been kind of slowly getting back into my musical career with that. I had the great opportunity to get my master's here with Dr. Meyer, so I have a master's in wind conducting. And I think at some point I will probably go back for a doctorate as well in composition, mostly so that I can be Dr. Spark, which I think would be very good. Not necessarily for the professional.
If you need a motivator, if anything, it's to be able to say Dr. Spark. I would agree with that.
Yes, exactly.
Thanks, guys. And I've been informed I'm going to answer these questions as well. So I got started with my music career as a violin player in 4th grade. And in middle school, I wanted to play the cello because I hadn't seen one before until middle school, and it was the coolest thing ever. So I learned bass clef and picked up the cello. Then I saw a high school marching band for the first time my freshman year of high school, and I thought that was the coolest thing I'd ever seen, and I wanted to march in the marching band and wear the uniform, but I didn't play any band instruments. So I approached Vanessa Eastman, my band director and orchestra director at the time, and I said, I want to join band, what can I play? And she very wisely suggested a trombone might be of like instrument to cello enough, so I learned how to toot my own horn in high school, and that eventually became wanting to become a band director myself. I thought marching band was the coolest, and I wanted to write drill and make shows, and that was just my obsession. So I came here to NAU on a euphonium scholarship because, you know, euphoniums are prettier than trombones, don't kill me. So I went to school here for 2 years as a euphonium player and decided that playing the euphonium and teaching band really wasn't my speed, but I really loved the band competitions and the concerts. I worked here in Ardrey Auditorium as a student as well. And that was just really my speed, was making concerts happen, making music happen, but not necessarily being the one conducting it, if that makes sense. And so I got my start basically here by wanting to be a band director, and I ended up instead being a band festival director, we'll just say. So that is how Stephanie got started. So a little bit of a different segue here. Can any of you share with us any specific influences either from directors or other women in music that you've seen throughout your careers that have really inspired you to say, you know what, I can do that? Any like individual specific people that you wanted to call out as good memories on your way here? If you would like to start, Abby.
Yeah. In my undergrad at Lawrence, we would have a lot of guest artists come through, and someone that came through quite a bit was incredible marimbist Nancy Zeltzman. She's like the marimbist. The sound that she makes is beautiful. And so throughout my years there, I met her a couple times. She also used to have a marimba festival that I would attend. And so she was someone that I saw early on, at least in my undergrad, as someone to look up to for sure. And then in that 1 year that I was in the University of Toronto, I wanted to go there to study with this woman, Beverly Johnston. And I actually just saw her at PASIC last week. She was winning a big award there. And she's someone that does more theatrical and speaking percussion pieces, and that's kind of how I got into that genre of music. Those have been the two main for me.
Thanks, Abby. And Dr. Hobby.
Yeah, I think for me, I've had a pretty interesting walk, and I was thinking about it as I was coming over here, even just like from the generational gap between myself and my younger friends up here. Having been born in 1974, most of my teachers and stuff that I grew up with and was in college with and stuff, it was a lot of probably fear-based teaching, fear-based learning, suck up and deal, just do it, don't question. However, and I've had the opportunity to study with some extremely famous flutists. The one teacher that I had the opportunity to study with that I had from the time, in high school when I was like, I'm going to do this flute thing, that I had the opportunity to study with was Jeannie Backstresser, who was the principal of the New York Philharmonic and one of the kind of main descendants from the American Flute School, coming from William Kincaid and Julius Baker, all on the East Coast, Philadelphia Orchestra, New York Philharmonic. And the year that I spent with her, she was one of the most kindest teachers I ever had. And she had the ego and the resume to not be during that time, honestly. She could have been cruel and gotten away with it. She could have taught in a very fear-based way. She could have been an absolute nasty diva, and she made the choice not to be. And I always felt safe when I went in the room with her. I always felt understood. I was not her best student. I had a lot of work to do. I had a lot of fundamentals to learn. And she was infinitely patient with me because she saw that I was one of the hardest working people she had ever met as a student, and she saw my potential. And she was actually the one that pulled me aside one day and said, Emily, have you ever considered going into collegiate teaching? And at the time that she asked me that question, what I thought she was doing passive-aggressively was telling me I wasn't good enough to be a performer. That was the way I took it. And I was like, oh, well, that's a nice way of saying you have no shot of getting an orchestra job. But what she was really doing was she was really seeing what my capabilities were as a musician, and she wanted to tell me what those were. And from that moment and also when I started my collegiate teaching career very young at age 23, I told myself that I was not going to be the kind of teacher that I had experienced otherwise, the more fear-based teaching, but that I was going to be more compassionate. I was going to look at my students as human beings and understand that all of us come in with different skill levels and how I could help them foster that. So she really influenced my teaching, a famous person who was actually kind instead of just being, sitting on their laurels and being nasty. So she really was a pivotal moment for me.
Thanks for sharing that. And Shannon?
I don't know if you know this, but the like Western classical music composition field is not exactly bursting at the seams with women and female composers. So I actually honestly did really have a lot of like musical role models that were women when I was going through it. All my teachers have been men, I think, like from high school upward. But I've had the benefit of having some really amazing interdisciplinary teachers that were women. In high school in particular, I will never forget my AP English teacher, and I will never forget my AP European Studies, European History teacher, because they were two of the most clever, funny women I've ever met in my life. And I hope they're both doing very well right now. I don't use Facebook because it makes me want to claw my eyeballs out. So hopefully they're doing good. But I think too, it also instilled in me appreciation for bringing that interdisciplinary learning to my music. They taught me how to ask questions and how to find things, how to read academic papers and actually understand them, how to write academic papers, all sorts of things like that. A lot of the things that I take with me now, I learned from people who were not musicians, I think.
Thanks for sharing that. I'll add on for my own influences. My middle and high school band directors, band and orchestra directors were both women, which I thought was the coolest ever. And I'll say, coming here to NAU, remember some people very vividly. Nancy Sullivan was teaching here when I was a student, and I thought she was the most, I'm going to say badass in Kitt Recital Hall, and I'm very sorry for doing that. But I think when you're talking about Nancy Sullivan, you kind of have to use that word. And so it was really, really cool just seeing just really anyone that was in the School of Music teaching was already inspirational just by the virtue of what they were doing with their everyday lives. And then I'll also add in Dr. Rick McEnany, who's still teaching, is just one of the kindest and funniest band directors that I think I've worked with before, and he really made sure that we had the right environment to just feel like we could be part of a group together, and that's one of the reasons why I enjoy music events so much, is doing them with the people that I enjoy spending time with. Think about what kind of questions you might want to have answered by us on stage. I'm going to ask one more question of the panel here, but if any of you in the audience or on the live stream would like to get a question answered, I'll have you line up over here by Emily. She'll wave at you. So if you want to have any questions answered, line up over here. The last thing that I'm going to ask of our prepared panel questions is going to be along the lines of any particular songs, and it's going to be hard, I know you're going to draw a complete blank as I ask this, but is there any song that you can think of from your past as you were either learning it or something that you saw performed that changed your opinion in a way, whether it be to pursue music or just change your opinion on a composer, any influential pieces that you'd like to talk to us about? And if you haven't already, go ahead and jump in first.
Okay. A really influential concert that I saw at Lawrence when I was an undergrad was the Cincinnati Percussion Group. It's a trio percussion ensemble, and they did one of Tan Dunn's water pieces. I think you guys have seen those before, but like bowls of water, and you're tapping, you're playing, the water's mic'd. And I had never seen anything like that, and I was just so in awe, and I always remember that concert. And a specific piece was a piece actually that I saw Nancy Zelsman play, the marimbas that I mentioned, called The Connection by James Rolfe. And it's a really quirky story and you're speaking it while playing marimba. And then I went on to learn that piece and then continued with other speaking and kind of more contemporary music. And so those two events really stuck with me.
I'm gonna go the more traditional route. I think was it last summer or last spring or something? I was in California and I went to hear the LA Phil. And I'd never heard the LA Phil live before, and I think the program was all newly composed music, and then, their finale thing was Beethoven 7. I was like, Beethoven 7, come on. I mean, I know every note of that score. I know every note of the flute part. I could probably conduct it from memory right now for the amount that I've studied Beethoven symphonies for orchestral audition stuff, and I was like, ugh. So the first half went, and actually the seats, I was sitting in the seats that are behind the orchestra, so you can see the conductor and you can watch what everybody's doing. And the first half was phenomenal, and what was even funnier about it is there were a lot of just kind of like innovative percussion things, and they had clearly gone to IKEA and bought like big salad bowls. You could still see like the label on it. It was hilarious. I was like, oh my gosh, I have that salad bowl at home. Anyway, so they do that, and I was like, wow, this is really great. And then they start Beethoven 7, and it was the most adorable, fun, and dynamic interpretation I had ever heard of that piece. And Dudamel did the most creative conducting I had seen. I could like see the flute player's part right there, Denis Boryakov, who is a phenomenal flutist. And it was so engaging, and I fell in love with Beethoven 7 again. And that was one of those transformative moments where I thought, we can translate and interpret old music in a modern way so that dorks like me can still enjoy it, and people that haven't heard it before can also enjoy it. So that was I've heard many other things that, Alban Berg's Boatsack at the Metropolitan Opera was another moment that was like, oh, but that was like the most recent one that I thought, you know what, I do like Beethoven 7. You would understand that of all people.
I have Beethoven trauma.
I was gonna say, we all do.
Sometimes I'll walk by Nancy's office. I actually, brief tangent, in my undergrad, my freshman year, our graduate assistant horn player made these like adorable little ornaments with everyone. They were clear, and they had the excerpts we had been working on the most that year, and so naturally mine was, and then I was just like, for me, I think kind of like two ways going like back and forth between like being like very inspired by like media and like game music, and then also discovering that I like also really enjoyed the classical side of things. I think when I was probably in like middle school, I got like really into Nobuo Uematsu's music, the like Final Fantasy series. Those concerts sell out, being played by like the LA Phil now and stuff, which is like very fun to see. So that definitely piqued my interest a lot in like getting more into music than I was. And then for kind of the more classical side of things, when I was in the Fort Worth Youth Orchestra, our director was Maestro Gutierrez. He conducted the orchestra at TCU at the time. I believe he's retired now. And he was just like an absolute delight. We were playing the second Hanson Symphony, like very common youth orchestra piece. And when we like did the concert, he was just having so much fun, and I was just having so much fun. And like a lot of times I like would get way too into my head like during a concert that I wasn't like actually enjoying the music or like the thing I was there to like ostensibly be enjoying doing. But with him and like a lot of the other like too. We just had like a really good time that concert. And it kind of reminded me at a time when I was like looking at like applying to colleges and stuff for undergrad, that I like actually did like playing music, and that I wasn't just total practicing all state excerpts like 12 hours a week and sitting in a room and waiting for the other people playing all state excerpts to play those. And so it was just a really good experience, and he was a really great conductor and teacher, and very thankful for that.
Thanks, Shannon. And I'll say mine will be a very short answer. If you guys want to start getting in line, if any of you have questions. Mine would be Shostakovich Symphony No. 5, having the final movement, just because it was so fun and so intense. It changed my mind as far as where I thought the intensity level could get with orchestral pieces. And that was probably the first piece that I was terrible at counting because I would just listen. And then, it's time to come in now, and inevitably be late every single time. So thank you guys. And I'm going to come over here, and I'm just going to host our Q&A panel from the audience. So if I could have you say your name and then your question for the panelists.
Hi, my name is Jelena. If you had any advice to give to your younger self, what would it be?
Oh my God. How much time do we have? Oh gosh, I should have practiced my scales in high school. I just should have practiced my scales in high school. I think it's a number of things. I think sometimes I was so focused on the work in the journey that I didn't actually enjoy the journey. And I think now when I look back at the opportunities that I had, especially at a pretty young age, starting to teach college at age 23, I was 2 years older than my seniors. That's unusual, but also quite a privilege. And I think I forgot in moments in those first 2 years of collegiate teaching to actually really enjoy it and to learn from it. And I think, I think even now, even when I'm preparing for a recital, I'm so obsessed with what has to happen for the recital, and then the recital happens, and I do have a little party on stage. I have a good time, but it takes me about a week later to actually have enjoyed the whole process getting there. And I am continually trying to remind myself to enjoy that process, no matter how hard it is. There are days where, even now, for as long as I've been playing, that like practicing is the last thing I want to do, and it's not enjoyable because I'm fighting against something or trying to achieve something. But there's also beauty in that particular process, and I lose sight of that pretty often. So that's what I would also tell myself that now. But I would tell my younger self to enjoy the process and the journey, and to learn from it, and to stop beating myself up over it.
I think similar for me, I would tell myself to not be in my head so much about everything, especially in undergrad, just like obsessed about, is this right, am I practicing enough, all these things, and then not enjoying it as much as I could have. And also, I think having a social life is important in college, and I had parts of that, I ran cross country and track, and so I had other non-music friends, which I think is great, everyone should try that. But yeah, I think even being more of a social being during that time, I wish I would have done.
If I could tell myself, younger self, anything, I would tell her that you have ADHD and you're autistic, go to a doctor and get some medication. I got a really late diagnosis for both things, and in retrospect, the signs were definitely there, especially when I was burning out in undergraduate. So I would definitely say if you're not feeling if your personal health is not quite where it should be, it's very much worth taking some time to take care of that and get that sorted out. And you may find some things that you weren't sure were there. The other thing I would say is I was so obsessed for a really long time with trying to get all the check marks like, this is what I'm supposed to do for my career as like a composer. I would go pick up guest artists from the airport like all the time. I would write nonstop. I wrote like 15 pieces in my undergrad, and I got all of them played, and I have recordings of all of them. And by the time I was done with it, I was really tired and miserable. So I think just like checking in with yourself to make sure that you're like actually happy doing what you're doing. It's not always going to be like easy or pleasant even. There's definitely going to be tough times, but if like the tough times are like vastly outweighing your enjoyment of music and creating art, then I do think it's worth kind of like pressing pause and like reevaluating, because I mean honestly there is probably like a sheep herder in Mongolia, like traditionally raising sheep, that doesn't have access to Wi-Fi or the internet. They do not know who Beethoven is. They don't know who Mozart is, and they're probably fine with that. So you do not have to be Beethoven or Mozart, because that is not the end-all be-all, and you can find happiness and goals that are much more down to earth than that.
Thank you for that, Shannon, and thank you for that question. I'll add one quick little thing, and that is you do not have to do a career that is your major. Your major does not have to immediately translate into the exact job that you are going to get when you graduate. All right, next question.
Hi, I'm Kaya, and first I wanted to say thank you for being here and making your presence loud in the school. I grew up in a very male-dominated band world, only male band directors, and so coming here and seeing people like you in this school is really a breath of fresh air, and it's really appreciated. Kind of along the same lines, what would be your advice for a young woman venturing into this arguably still male-dominated field?
I was actually thinking about that yesterday. Again, as the elder statesperson on stage, trying to figure out what I could add to the conversation. That's a really hard one. And honestly, what I feel like it manifests the most, as most of you know, I have two children. I have two girls, two teenagers, one who's about to be 13 and one who's about to be 15. And they are both forces to be reckoned with, and I love it. What's been really interesting for me in raising those two girls is finding the balance between letting them know they have a voice, while, not to get into specifics, but while society still is having the message towards women that you can have a voice if you stay in a box. That's a hard one. So the advice that I give to them is, if nobody listens, speak louder. If somebody says no, ask why. If you see something, say something. If it doesn't feel right in your gut, question it. So that's the advice that I'm giving to my girls, who I hope launch into the world and take it over. And it's also what I hope I'm able, as a flutist, I teach primarily female students. And I hope that the mentorship and the example that I set towards them is take no prisoners, how I work through the world, how I present myself within the School of Music, how I present myself as a teacher, how I present myself as a performer. And that doesn't mean you're not respectful to others. It doesn't mean that you rein it in. I mean, I am a New Yorker. I have moments. But I think there's a way to go through the world strongly and to make sure your voice is heard. So I would give women heading into a male-dominated field that advice. And I think this is across the board though, I don't think you ever have to settle. I think one of the hardest things I have as a teacher is my responsibility is to teach students to their full potential, help them find their voice, help them find their way, lead them in that direction. And yes, there are standards and all the things, but I've had plenty of people tell me that I was never going to be what I am right now, and I don't ever want to be that. So if that is told to you, ask the hard questions. Don't just take it. So, and I don't know if that really answers your question fully, Kaya, but if you're not being heard, and this is for anybody, honestly, speak louder would be the best thing I could say.
So percussion obviously is male-dominated, just like the band world. And so a lot of my colleagues and professors going through all my studies have been men. And more recently, like when I was teaching in Tennessee, at the University of Tennessee, and then here, I would sometimes get other male percussion professors to ask me to speak to their students about being a woman percussionist. And that was hard for me because I don't think of myself as a woman percussionist. And I think, so a lot of this is just like how you go through the world and how you're going to think of yourself, and then in turn, hopefully others will think of you that way too. So I don't categorize my students in that way at all. We're percussionists, we play percussion, and that's what we're trying to do.
I definitely had kind of an interesting experience. I feel like kind of like moving through this world because I'm not like outwardly like feminine presenting, and that has like absolutely affected the way that I have interacted with professors who are men, and just like men and women in the world. And there were like some really hard shocks for me when I got to undergrad, and I saw the way that some of my more like feminine presenting colleagues, like my fellow students, were treated by some of the landed gentry, old dude faculty. I was really like shocked and horrified a lot of the time because that just wasn't an experience I went through. I got like served at Taco Bell the other day, which personally doesn't bother me, so it was funny, you can laugh. But
Surprisingly, I actually get that too because of my haircut. Yeah.
at Taco Bell,
No. Taco Bell. That's hilarious. I got you. No, but like in life, like if somebody comes up from behind me, I can't tell you the number of times, and I'm like, okay. I mean, fine. But I actually get that too.
and it is interesting because people really do treat you differently when they like the switch flips and they like realize what gender you're probably presenting as. Very interesting. So I would definitely go along with that. If you see something, say something, like please absolutely do that. The things like some of my colleagues have told me in private that happened to them have appalled me and made me very, very angry, and they should make you very angry too. And I don't know, if they like very much personally do not want to make an event out of it, I understand that, and I definitely think you should respect their wishes primarily, first and foremost, because their like comfort and mental health should be prioritized. But if you're in any position to stand up for them, or if they come to you for like help and they would like you to stand with them while they like confront an abuser or anyone like that, it is very scary, but it is very much worth doing. And I think that we're starting to get to a place where we don't really have to fear like necessarily like institutional backlash in that way, but it's still very scary. So like just show solidarity wherever you can when things like that happen. Right now, especially too, if you know any like trans women colleagues, it is not a great environment out there right now for trans folks in general. But definitely like just kind of like make it known that like you're there for them. Like not that you're like speaking for them, but that you will like stand next to them as needed, just to like support them and be there for them.
Thank you for that, Shannon. And we have time for 1.5 more questions. So we'll have. You were standing here the whole time.
I'm Kilara, and my question for y'all is, how do you healthily deal with disappointment and rejection from maybe like auditions or performance that maybe didn't go the way you wanted it to? How do you deal with that in a healthy manner?
Yeah, that's a good one. Okay, so there is a level that I have gotten to with myself of self-acceptance. And there's a level of understanding that There are different ways to play and perform an instrument. There's performances that are very self-fulfilling, and then there are what I would call assessment-based performances, right? So the yes or no's, the audition, yes or no. The entrance audition, the yes or no. I will say for myself, which Kilara knows because I share this information with my studio a lot, the worst playing I do is in the yes or no situation, the outcome-based situation. The best playing I do is in recitals or chamber ensembles where I'm able to just emote. There's no rules. I don't have to play within a structure. For me, what I've done for myself, as far as getting over disappointment, as a performer, disappointment is automatically built in. It could be extrinsic or intrinsic. It's the intrinsic that's kind of the worst part. But I also have had to get to a point where I understand that as long as I am prepared as I possibly can be for the event, I've done my job. And then anything else that happens out of that is out of my control. It's when I haven't prepared as well as I should prepare, that's when the intrinsic starts. So I've shifted it from the event to the process, which is what I was mentioning before, is enjoying the process and the journey. So the process and the journey becomes my focus, and then the moment is just the bonus, because I don't make the decision in that moment. I make decisions in recitals. I make a lot of decisions when I'm performing recitals, but I don't get to make the end game. So I think letting go of the control has helped a lot. I traditionally do eat ice cream after those events because there's always something to look forward to when there's Ben and Jerry's involved. But I do, there's a lot of self-growth and self-acceptance that has to come. It is, as I tell my flute studio all the time, it is not life or death, it's just flute playing. And when you look at it the whole span of your life, it feels like your whole life. There are many other aspects of your life. You've got to compartmentalize it, because if it overtakes everything, then yeah, you won't get up the next day after a bad result. So that's what I do for myself.
To go off on the it's not life or death, my dad is a neonatologist. So he takes care of the really sick babies in the nursery when they're born. And when I would go to him in undergrad and I would be upset about this or that, he would be like, just do your thing, no one's gonna die. You know, and he goes to work and people could die. And so we just have to kind of get into perspective. I do think it's good to have, high standards for yourself, and especially when you're younger, to be upset if something doesn't go well, as long as it pushes you to be better moving forward. So I think there is some positive to that negative. But yeah, as going on into your career, it's not sustainable to have such harsh feelings about yourself. Like it won't continue. You won't be able to be a musician if you continue to think that way. So yeah, and I think also over time, as you become more established and mature, the preparation is better. So you do know how to prepare better. So there are less performances that hopefully that are that really didn't go your way because you knew exactly how you had to prepare for that.
And I would add one thing to what Dr. Fisher said too. Of course, I'm slightly blanking. What was I gonna say? Oh, it'll come back. I'll let Shannon go, and then it'll come back. It was brilliant, actually.
I believe you. I will gladly yield my time when it comes back. Just to piggyback off that a little bit too. I think a lot of situations where I was very disappointed at a performance I gave, I didn't when I got to the reflecting stage, I didn't properly take the time to actually figure out what was going wrong and what I could improve on. My horn professor in undergrad, he had a very, very strict way of teaching and what he wanted all his students to do, and it just did not work for me. And I only figured that out 2 years into studying with him, that I just didn't work well that way. And I finally looked at some other ways of practicing in smaller gaps more frequently as opposed to long stretches, things like that. So I think it's definitely worth taking a look at those things too. It's not always going to be that transformative or anything, but sometimes those moments you are very lucky when you screw up and something really clicks and you finally figure something out. So sometimes from big disappointments you can actually make some pretty big discoveries. Another thing I would say is that, I think it's impossible to not feel disappointed or angry or upset, and that you should absolutely let yourself feel disappointed, angry, or upset, and you should put some Black Sabbath on and eat ice cream and take care of yourself, because it is going to happen and it sucks, and it's happened to everyone, and they can also confirm that it sucks. So be kind to yourself and allow a little bit of grace there. You don't have to come back from it right away, and definitely don't bottle it all up, or you will burn out very, very hard. I can speak from experience on that one. But yeah, first and foremost, take care of yourself.
I'll add the one quick thing that I thought of. So I think the other thing when you're hit with disappointment, I think it's really important to know yourself enough to know how that manifests in yourself. Does it manifest with tears? Does it manifest with depression? Do you need to be alone? Do you need to be with people? For me, for better or worse, disappointment manifests itself in extreme anger. And extreme anger for me, which is actually healthy, makes me work harder because I'm just pissed. And I don't like when anybody tells me that there's something I can't do. I'm like, oh, you did not. So if I do something in an audition or on stage and it doesn't go so well, it fuels me to the point where I am going to make it happen next time it needs to happen. Maybe that's positive, maybe that's negative, but I think it's important to know how it manifests in yourself, because then you can come up with steps after that. If it's 2 days of sleeping in bed and crying, then just do it. Get it out of your system. If it's getting back in the practice room the next day and practicing the lick that you missed, do that. You have to know yourself well enough to know how that stuff manifests, and then how you come up with solutions from that.
I love all of that advice. The only thing I'm going to add is just to reiterate and emphasize that spite can be the biggest motivator. If you want to watch us not be able to do something, just challenge us by saying, no, you can't do that. And I would say everyone on the stage, I've seen you guys all do amazing things, and sometimes maybe motivated out of spite, or just to show someone that they are wrong and they have underestimated you.
Absolutely.
100%.
I do probably most things out of spite, unironically.
Well, thank you all very much for being here today in the audience. And then if you guys could all please join me with a very warm round of applause for Dr. Abby Fisher, Dr. Emily Happy, and Shannon Spark today. Thank you guys so much for being here. And before you run away, Tau Beta Sigma has a small little gift for each of you.
Oh, thank you.
And if you are just tuning in here at the end, this whole event is brought to you by Tau Beta Sigma National Honorary Band Service Sorority, promoting women in the music industry and women in music. Thank you all.